Academic institutions of higher education in the United States are facing all kinds of challenges these days, including cuts to federal funds, declining enrollment, a looming demographic cliff, rising costs, and for the purposes of our episode today, growing questions about the value and relevance of traditional degree programs to future careers. How can higher education and other stakeholders respond? We have a terrific panel with us today to help us think through and address these challenges and to explore alternative pathways for learners. Also, as always, we would like to hear your questions, which you can submit to our panelists by using the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You will also find closed caption access there. So let's get started. Let me welcome our guests. So today with us, we have two of my colleagues from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Liya Escalera is lecturer on education and faculty co-chair of the higher education concentration. Bridget Terry-Long is a Saris professor of education and economics. And Jeff Strohl is research professor and director of the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce. So thank you all for joining us here today and looking forward to this conversation. So I think, Jeff, why don't we start with you? You and your colleagues recently produced a report that included a lot of projections about the future of jobs in the United States. And in that report, you predicted that the number of well-paying jobs will grow by more than 20% over the next 10 years or so. So can you tell us more about the key findings around that report and some of your perceptions about what this means for higher education?
Thank you all for having me. Yeah, our report on good jobs projections paints a picture of the future, which is a continuation of the past, which is a build on upskilling, which is going to raise the demand for education in our economy. And this is setting up a crisis as we face all the distrust that is building about college being worth it. The BA is where we're going to see the primary amount of growth on what we call good jobs, bringing people into access to the middle class and upward economic opportunity. So as we think about what's coming at us, there is a skills crisis that exists today, and it's going to build, especially as we move towards 2032. So I'm really happy to be talking about career pathways, because we need to help students and workers figure out how to navigate their way through the education system, but also in the labor market. In particular, if they start in middle skills jobs, how do they find a pathway upwards into towards the BA and a higher economic opportunity? Early on conversations about the blue collar economy, there was talk about $130,000 jobs in the blue collar economy. 3% of the jobs in the blue collar economy, the middle skills economy, pay above 130,000. So our chance of uplift for people is going to be towards following upskilling and get people into towards the BA. So as we think about this, we need to think about how our model of education works and think more towards a portfolio model than we have about a stackable model, because the way we do things, I think, in the U.S. economy is to bundle skills together. I'm not so sure that we stack them on top. And the glue that holds these together is general and specific education. So right now we hear about everybody talking, let's do more specific, more specific, more specific. But there's a lot of fear that will hold us back from our maximum productivity. So we need to remember that the secret sauce to the U.S. economy to hit those good jobs is a combination of general and specific education. And I'm very fearful at the moment we're going to not meet the crisis of the skills gap because we're going to overinvest in specific education and forget that we do a unique job in the United States of combining those two. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for giving us that overview. Bridget, let me turn now to you. You are currently co-chairing a new commission at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences that's looking at opportunities after high school across the board. So can you tell us a little bit about that commission, its work and its focus and the motivation behind it?
Yes, thank you, Fran. It's wonderful to be here to talk about this important issue. So, this is really around the question about whether or not college is worth it, or what should our students do to prepare for this changing economy. And so, as Fran said, I am part of this commission on opportunities after high school, and we're seeking to take a step back and put together a vision of what all students need so that they can make choices and succeed in whatever pathway they choose. One of the first things that we want to emphasize is college is more than just four-year degree. We really mean post-secondary education or higher education generally, and that can look in many, many different ways, but it is about getting advanced training, and whether that is a community college, a four-year degree, an apprenticeship, other kinds of models out there, that they are incredibly valuable. But the second thing we acknowledge in the commission, just taking a step back, is the bargain is somewhat changed. So it's been for so long that we've said, okay, take so many years of math and so many years of history, go to college, get a degree, a bachelor's degree, but the devil's really in the details. So there's no question, as an economist, I can tell you there's no question that on average, those with post-secondary education, whether a 2-year or 4-year degree, make more money over the long term. But the fact is, while the average has been positive, continues to be positive, there are some who are having very large returns, and others that are seeing much smaller returns, especially when you consider debt levels and so on. So we have to change the way that we're thinking about the choices and supporting the choices that students are making. It's not just about hard skills, certain kinds of courses, but we also need to be empowering students with relational skills. For example, the research suggests that the jobs where there's been the most wage growth are jobs where people work together in teams, where they're able to collaborate. We know that creativity is important. You need to continually be able to adapt. And I think the growth of AI, and this is certainly not the first technology to impact the labor market, but it's constantly evolving. And so we need to prepare students, adults, for a lifetime of being able to learn and have that mindset of lifelong learning, so that they can navigate whatever their career is going to look like. So I'm hoping that we'll get into, conversations about, it's not only if you go, but where you go, what you study when you're there, and then how much do you pay for it? I think so much of the pressure we're feeling is now, even for the middle class, it's become so expensive, the debt levels, and it feels risky when some degrees are paying off a lot more than others.
Great. Thanks, Bridget. Thanks for that overview and that intro. And Liya, I'm going to turn to you now and ask you to speak more to this relatively new pathway into post-secondary education known as early college. And so can you sort of give us a little overview of actually what that is, and then why is it particularly relevant as we're thinking about, how institutions of higher ed can better prepare students in this changing economy?
Absolutely. And thank you for having me today. Early college, and this can look a little different depending on the state and the institution. There is no one set model for early college. But at their core, early college pathway programs are partnerships between high schools and institutions of higher education, and they allow students to begin taking courses in college while they're in high school. So early college is a form of dual enrollment or AP courses, but the real difference is that early college pathways are a package. They're a curated curricular pathway that is scaffolded and that features things like integrated support services, coaching, advising, tutoring, and that early college pathway is connected to a career pathway. So one of the goals of these pathways is to expose students to fields that they may not be very knowledgeable about, but they're interested in, and it orients students to the vocabulary, the core ideas, and the job opportunities in that space. In most states, the pioneers of early college are community college. And I think if we are questioning how best to do early college, community college is a real place for us to turn our attention and learn. They tend to have the most extended experience with early college and many models where we can really see early college flourishing. The goals of early college programs differ, but the common idea is not only to expose students to career pathways, But to help students who might not see themselves as quote unquote college material to have an experience with college curriculum in a supportive and a culturally relevant environment. And also to reduce the cost of education. So students in early college pathway programs may graduate high school with 12 college credits or even up to 30 college credits. In some spaces where high schools and colleges have really built deep partnerships, it's possible for a student to graduate with their high school diploma and an associate's degree, right, in the same week. So the credits vary, but the idea is that when students leave high school, because early college comes at no cost to students and their families, the cost of completing that bachelor's degree has been greatly reduced. And the time to complete that bachelor's degree has been greatly reduced. Because one of the things we're most worried about with low-income students in terms of their access to higher education and career preparation is the opportunity cost. So every hour they're spending in class is an hour they may not be able to work. And that can make a really hard decision for students and their families.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks for putting that out. Well, let me circle back a little bit to one of the things that Jeff sort of started hitting on in his opening remarks, and that's about the role of employers. Jeff, what do you see the responsibilities, the roles? How can the employers work more closely with our higher education institutions to sort of create this better pathways, but also thinking about these general and specific skills that also Bridget was sort of talking to a little bit? Where do you see some possibilities there?
Oh, it's a long conversation there. I think one of the things we need to really be focused on and what can we do to bring the workplace and the classroom closer together. And so we need the employer to come into that. But the employers have also dropped the ball when it comes to their investment in employer training. So right now they're treating the labor market as a spot market. They're telling us that they don't have a resume there, but they're not actually putting in the investments to train people to move them towards productivity. So we need to see a commitment on the side of the employer to help the student worker, dislocated worker, whoever, to go to productivity. So they need to really engage on that side, but they also need to, we have to figure out some kind of risk sharing model. And so when working with these university sector, the college sector, hopefully we can find a way that the student is bearing a little bit of that risk of bringing the pieces together while the employer ponies up and begins to move to the pre-1993 world where there was much more commitment. So that's one. The second piece is figuring out ways to use practitioners from the shop, from the factory or the company, bring them into the classroom, because one thing that can do is bring very modernized information that's ahead of curriculum development to the classroom and help enable closing that gap, but not over insist that we don't want it. The US is not going to work by taking occupation back to 8th grade. Just not how we do things in the United States. So we have to figure out a balance point closer to the labor market.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that sounds about right to me. One of the questions, and Bridget and Liya, and actually I'm sort of checking the chat a little bit that Ben put out, that I think it's a good one, that the push for skills-based hiring is often framed as anti-degree. Given the demonstrated career value of degrees, what are positive ways that we can reframe this discussion? So how can, Bridget, you started hitting on that a little bit, Liya?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So, first of all, there's this tension between you get this degree, but the degree may not be preparing you for the labor market that there is today. And yet we see this persistent, very durable return to having a degree. Often, I think, because it's serving as a proxy for your perseverance, your ability to work with others and projects. And, if you are going to institutions where you're going to do a lot of writing, where you're going to do a lot of problem solving, those skills you can then take, and really the college degree is serving as a signal for that. The problem is we've gone so far to making it easy for employers just to say, okay, you must have a degree, that they've been leaving really talented folks out of the pipeline. And that's why you've had this push towards skill-based hiring and ways of measuring that. And I don't think it is an either or. but we need to figure out ways really to have broader set of measures to try to attract talent and into the workforce. So I think both are critically important. One thing I do also want to say, oftentimes the college degree gets you in the door, gets you on a trajectory, but once you get in that job, you have to prove that you actually have those skills. And so those skills like collaboration and communication, the further you get along and the farther you get along, get away from school, you either have that track record of actually doing it at the employer or you don't. And so that's another important thing. The initial hiring might be different than as you move along in your career, and then you have work experience that demonstrates you have these other relational skills, habits of mind, and so forth.
Great. Thanks, Bridget. Go ahead, Liya. I think you want to add to that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that we have been leaving too many people out of opportunities. And I think also we have to be mindful about the career development programs and partnerships we're building. Sometimes we're building those opportunities based on a mental model of who a college student that isn't actually the reality of who we're serving in many of our institutions. A lot of programs are not built for adult learners who are balancing other work and family responsibilities. We're thinking about college students as primarily college students with a few responsibilities on the side, instead of real members of our communities that are balancing work and family with college as well. So I think we need to reconsider what are the assumptions underlying some of these programs. And I also want to go back to something that Jeff said around the balance between career preparation and a general education. And I have seen this pendulum really swing where we've de-emphasized the liberal arts in career-oriented programs. And when I speak with employers, I've had the opportunity to speak with a lot of the major employers in Boston. When we ask them, what do you want to see in college graduates, or what do you want to see in college interns? They will list things like critical thinking skills, active listening, being able to digest complicated information and communicate it to colleagues, things like teamwork. These are skills deeply embedded in the humanities and in the liberal arts, and we don't always call those workforce development. And even worse, sometimes we divorce them from workforce development. So I think we need to question some of these underlying assumptions that have been part of our design process for career pathway programs.
Can I just jump in very quickly?
Yeah, sure, Jeff.
With skills-based hiring, I'm a little bit skeptical. In the initial formulation of skills-based hiring, it seems to be a statement that experience makes a middle skills worker substitutable for a BA. I think it's very difficult to think how we make education policy based on go get 20 years worth of experience. And so it makes me deeply concerned. Secondly, with credentials, if we're going to label each skill, aren't we adding a lot more credentials to a market that's already fairly populated? On the other hand, what skills-based hiring makes us think about is that work, occupation, this goes back to some work by Harry Braverman, is a bundle of individual skill sets, tasks, and activities. And our job as educators is to figure out how curriculum, at workforce development anyway, aligns with those pieces. So skill-based hiring can help us start to think about that. And then just as a side note, someone asked about good examples about people who bring the workplace and classroom together, the co-op programs, the labor colleges. Tennessee in particular, in their technical college system, brings practitioners from engaged employers into the classroom for 6 months, rotates them in and out so they solve that. And they also use virtual simulations as a way to actually replicate the classroom to lower costs on things like welding, et cetera.
Yeah, I feel like we could just keep going on. And I think we as panelists are seeing the questions, so we're also starting to respond to that. I want to pick up on, several people have asked about AI, technology, and how that's impacting the world. I want to tie this back to something that Liya said earlier. These skills that we think about with the humanities, we think about with liberal arts, are critically important, although learning how to communicate and write and problem solve can happen within a nursing program. It can happen in so many different places, and recognizing just how important those skills are. I think others would, across higher education, across post-secondary training programs, the best programs you are going to find this. I think the struggle that we have as college as many options have become so expensive and debt has become so pervasive, is people would like to have guarantees. They'd like to have tangible things. And it's so hard. Something we struggle with, I think, in education is not having excellent measures of learning, excellent measures of skill. We're using proxies for so many things. So even the skill-based hiring gets to be incredibly difficult. But at the same time, the skills, and, you know, I used to hear this from my father who worked in HR. He just wanted someone who could write, who could communicate, who could work with others. It's what they so desperately needed, but it was hard to identify. It's also really important, not when we talk about employers, we're not just talking about the managers. I will often hear managers say they're looking for certain skills, but that doesn't get incorporated into what HR practices are. And so then you have the mismatch that is there as well. I'll end by just saying, you know, with AI and technological change, which has been going on for decades and will continue to go on, I think it helps us rethink how we teach, how we train, simulations, engagement. But I think it also really underscores the importance of the humanities, of liberal arts, of creativity. Because you know, there are some things that simple AI can replace, but ideally figuring out how humans can augment their skills, their creativity, and so forth, using these tools to be even more productive, to find better solutions, is really what we need to be training students to do. We need to be doing that right now, but none of us can say what's going to be happening 10 years from now. So we need to give students the skills to be able to adapt continually, whatever the next new thing is.
Let me, one of the questions that came up, and I know some of you have been thinking about this, is that, you know, there are models in Europe, particularly in Switzerland and Germany, with very well-developed apprenticeship systems. And what's your sense? In the US, we haven't really quite been able to get there. So I'd be curious to hear any of your thoughts about, is that a direction we should be moving in a more sort of deliberate way? And is it even possible to get there given where we are now?
Well, let me just jump in very quickly. I don't think we have to recognize that we do things differently here than they do things in Europe. If you look at vocational education and training in Europe, I forget what the levels are. We don't even appear as a blip on the thing. So we don't do it. And if we look at the success of these apprenticeship programs, they really require a corporatist structure where governments, business, and unions, which barely exist in the United States, can actually work together. And there's a great paper by Jute Elmendinger, who was a 1989 Harvard dissertation that's called Education Systems and Labor Market Outcomes. And she really lays out how we have to have the paralleled institutional structure in the labor market to have that type of education system work well to the scale that you're talking about there. And we don't have it. And this goes back to employer engagement. They have active labor market policy. They actually try to get somebody hired in a job. We have passive labor market policy where we dump somebody off in the labor market and say, well, we did a good job, they're going to get a job. It doesn't work like that. So.
All right, just want to see if anyone else has points on that. All right,
Yeah.
let me.
No, the underlying structures, as Jeff said, are so different. I think the other thing that we grapple with in the US is we don't want to track students too early. We want them to be able to explore, but frankly, our system isn't built that if they change their mind, it's easy to switch to something else. The other piece is if we train people for a particular job, what happens when that job disappears 5 years from now? Do they have skills that they can then transfer into something else? And so we really do have to start thinking about this in various ways, and the way that we do our policy, the way that we structure things, as this is a long-term, constantly evolving labor market life, and the skills that are going to be necessary.
Mm-hmm. And Jeff, you had in your opening remarks talked a little bit about moving more from like a stackable credentials to a more portfolio lifelong learning model. Tell us more about that, and if there are particular models that you see that are working. I think, again, as a country, we're struggling in that area to really figure out a way to integrate lifelong learning and upskilling in a way that is a little bit more deliberate. But to tell us some more about that.
Well, I think that if we look at how people use certificates and certifications as a proxy for this whole phenomenon, the most BAs hold certifications. Certifications don't stand by themselves, right? So it's a very good example about how people add something on as they're moving through the career to get career advancement. We see the same thing with certificates. And so the idea that we go to school, go to work is gone, right? Well, it's not gone, but it's changing. So we have this model where you enter the labor market, you find out you need something else, and so you get a certificate or a certification adds on to your skill set. So I use the imagery of a tool belt rather than a stack, right? And we might stack with inside the curriculum in as someone before they hit the labor market, but when you hit the labor market, you need to add a new skill. And so this goes back to where I think skill-based hiring is a good idea. How do we as educators provide that skill that adds to the portfolio? People don't, I don't think there's a lot of evidence about stacking as a phenomenon. If you look at the data when stacking has been introduced in a state as policy, you see tripling, quadrupling of the number of certificates. It's a bean counting game. It's not necessarily a benefit to the student, but if you also look at these other data, the way it appears, I don't know the sequencing regretfully, but people get a degree, get a certificate, get a certification, get a certification, get a degree. So they're bundling in response to the needs in the labor market. Work on skill builders also demonstrates that, how people use the schooling to advance their skill set to meet the new needs on the job rather than A plus B equals C. And I think you can see this in the occupational competency clearinghouse models that DOL does. We've got this foundational build of general skills, get close to the labor market, you got very specific skills. So then as you become dislocated or need to move, you got to refresh that set. And so it's add to the portfolio.
So I'm keeping an eye on the time. We have about 3 minutes left. So I just want to invite each of you to offer some final thoughts or insights as we are grappling with this, this question I think we'll be grappling with for a while about how our institutions of higher education can, adapt more fully in terms of preparation of students for the workforce and for their lives. So any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our audience with? Bridget, I'm going to start with you.
Thanks, Fran.
You're welcome.
So many issues, and I really appreciate the questions. I had a chance to look over them. This is a complicated thing. It's not a one size fits all. I think the things we have to support students to do is to find a match between some general interests, supports, and mentors to take their skills to the next level. Unfortunately, I have a high school junior right now, and what I've basically said to him is, you need to continue, you need to have a set of skills, you need to learn how to do something that someone is willing to pay you for, and the more rare it is, the more you will get paid. But that's generally what this process is about. And as my father would say, they can't take education away from you. I think right now with so much uncertainty that is going on and not knowing what is ahead, education allows you to say that you have certain credentials, but it also hopefully has taught you how to adapt and think and collaborate and be nimble, because that's really what's going to be required.
Okay, thanks, Bridget. Go ahead, Jeff.
Two thoughts. One, the world is becoming more and more complicated, increasing number of majors, occupations. We need to really invest in our counseling system. As a data junkie, I couldn't navigate many of the sites. I say I cannot expect a 17, 18-year-old to do that, so we need help. Second thing is, when we talk about pathways, we really need to start doing a lot more research on the career side of those pathways. Quoting Bob Reich, which got to be first job, next job, best job, and right now we can tell you how to to get the first job. We can't tell you how to get the best job. And part of this will be accomplished by bringing occupation into the state longitudinal data systems that is happening in a few states, but there is work going on wage record enhancement, which will enable us to understand how people are utilizing their skills in the labor market successfully and not successfully, and then how they move towards economic mobility. We just can't answer the question right now.
Thank
Well,
you, Jeff.
anyway.
Yeah, well, and go ahead, Liya.
I think we need to be having more conversation like this that brings people with different expertise to the table. I mean, one of the challenges we're always working against is a very fragmented K through 12 system, higher education system, business and industry. And as to Jeff's point, navigating it as a young person is incredibly challenging. Navigating it now throughout your life is incredibly challenging. So we need to really center different student experiences and think about how to build pathways in a way that speaks to who they are, and that provides both expertise and flexibility. And this is where I think an interdisciplinary approach, interdisciplinary across the academic disciplines, but interdisciplinary across all the different kinds of academic and extended skill sets that students and their communities bring to the table. So I think this is an opportunity for us to rethink some of the mental models that have served as the underlying assumptions of our programs, because what we have right now in many of our pathway programs is not able to meet the challenges that are in front of us. So this is an opportunity, to come together and to do better.
Well, I think that's a good note to end on. So Liya, Bridget, Jeff, thank you each so much for joining us.